I still remember that morning like it happened yesterday. I woke up feeling the usual mix of excitement and nerves because it was a day I had been planning for weeks. My bag was light, my mind focused on a short trip, and I was thinking about nothing more than checking into the hotel quietly and preparing for the meeting later. I had no idea that what seemed like an ordinary day would turn into one of the most shocking experiences of my life. A story I knew I would never forget. I walked into the hotel, the lobby bustling with guests, the soft hum of conversations, and the faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. I had stayed in countless hotels before, always treated politely, often warmly, and never had I expected what was about to happen. As I approached the reception desk, I noticed her immediately. She was young, sharp-eyed, and seemed like any receptionist you might pass by. Friendly on the surface, professional in her movements. But there was something about the way she looked at me that made my stomach twist. It was dismissive, almost contemptuous, as though I was invisible, as if my presence alone was an annoyance she didn't need. I smiled politely, hoping to break through whatever mood she carried. "Good morning," I said softly. "I have a reservation." Her eyes flicked to me, her expression flat, almost cold. She barely acknowledged my words, her hands moving to shuffle papers with a deliberate lack of urgency. Each second felt heavier, each glance more piercing, and I realized that this wasn't just ordinary inattentiveness. There was a judgment in her eyes, a silent declaration that I didn't belong, and it struck me harder than I could have imagined. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that some people are just having a bad day, that perhaps she didn't realize who I was, that it was nothing personal. I handed her my ID, trying to make everything as easy as possible. But her eyes darted over it, lingering with suspicion, and she made a quiet sigh that felt directed straight at me, almost audibly rolling her eyes. I felt my cheeks flush, not out of shame, but out of disbelief that someone could be so quick to dismiss me without reason. She asked questions I had never been asked before, documents I didn't even think were necessary. "Do you have this?" she demanded sharply, as if my failure to provide it immediately was a crime. Other guests passed by, unaware of the silent drama unfolding, while I felt my patience fray. I could feel the anger rising, a quiet storm threatening to spill over. I had faced difficult clients, rude strangers, and countless challenges, but nothing felt quite like this. A combination of injustice, humiliation, and the inexplicable disbelief that someone could treat me this way simply because of assumptions. I reminded myself to stay polite, to keep my head high. My training, my experience, all of it taught me to handle people with patience. But it was impossible not to notice the whispers from nearby staff, the stifled laughs from the corner of the lobby, the way she handed me the key card, as if it were a punishment rather than a simple transaction. "Here, try not to cause trouble," she said, and I felt the words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. Yet beneath all the frustration, beneath all the humiliation, there was a small, quiet satisfaction building inside me. I knew something she didn't. Something so unexpected, so shocking, that when it came out, the entire atmosphere would shift in an instant. I smiled politely, accepting the card, pretending to be the polite, inconsequential guest she expected me to be. But in my mind, I was ready, waiting for the exact moment to reveal the truth. And I could feel it. The tension building, the moment stretching, the silent anticipation in the air. I took a deep breath, walked toward the elevator, and for the first time that morning, I allowed myself a small, secret smile. This wasn't just a hotel check-in. This was a story that would shock everyone who witnessed it. A story about judgment, assumptions, and the hidden truths people carry. I paused for a moment by the elevator, hearing her voice call out to me again, sharp, dismissive, filled with the same disbelief I had felt all along. And I thought silently that she had no idea who she was dealing with, no clue how much her assumptions would soon crumble in the face of reality. This was just the beginning, I realized. Nothing she had said, nothing she had done, would prepare her for what was coming. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, I could feel the weight of the secret I carried, the truth that would turn this ordinary day into a story no one would ever forget. I didn't know yet how the next few minutes would unfold, how her disbelief would turn into shock, or how I would navigate the moment without letting anger take control. But I knew one thing. Everything was about to change, and by the time it did, no one, including her, would ever see me the same way again. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped out, feeling the polished floor beneath my feet and the faint hum of activity around me. I could hear the distant murmur of guests, the soft clatter of luggage wheels, and the occasional chime of the reception bell. Everything seemed normal, ordinary even, but I could still feel the tension lingering behind me like a shadow. The receptionist's gaze had followed me as I walked away, sharp and assessing, though she didn't realize it yet. I carried a truth she could never have imagined. I made my way down the hallway, each step measured, careful. My heart was still racing from the exchange, and yet there was a quiet thrill building inside me. I reminded myself to stay calm, to maintain the polite demeanor I had relied on for so long. But every nerve in my body was alert. I could feel the invisible weight of judgment pressing down on me, and it made me think of all the times people had underestimated me simply because they didn't know my story. I reached the room and entered, placing my bag gently on the bed. I took a moment to steady myself, to breathe, to let the quiet calm of the room contrast with the storm of emotion still swirling in the lobby. I thought about how absurd it was that such a small interaction could feel so enormous, so personal. And yet, I knew that this wasn't just about me. It was about the assumptions we carry, the judgments we make without understanding, the prejudice that exists in places we least expect. Then came the phone call. It was brief, almost casual, but it sent a jolt through me. Someone needed my approval for a decision regarding the hotel, a small but critical matter that only the owner could authorize. I smiled quietly to myself. The truth I held was more than just a secret. It was power, authority, the ability to shift perceptions in an instant. And yet, I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted something far more impactful, a lesson that would linger, a moment that would force her to confront her own assumptions. I left the room and walked back toward the lobby, each step deliberate. The receptionist was still at her post, her expression unchanged, though I could sense the faint tension in her posture. Other guests passed by, unaware, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. My pulse quickened as I approached. I could feel the air around us shift, the subtle tightening of space, the unspoken anticipation building with every step. When I reached her, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't act dramatically. I simply handed over the necessary papers, my movements calm, measured, polite. And then, in a tone quiet enough to make her lean in, I told her the truth. The words left my lips smoothly, almost gently, yet their impact was instantaneous. I was the owner of the very hotel she had dismissed, ignored, and judged without a second thought. For a moment, nothing happened. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, and a flicker of disbelief passed over her face. The confident, dismissive smirk she had worn for so long vanished, replaced by shock, confusion, and finally, panic. I could see it all in her expression, the silent calculation of a person suddenly realizing that their assumptions were completely wrong. Around us, the lobby seemed to hold its breath. Colleagues paused mid-step, other guests stopped talking, and the air was electric with suspense. I stayed calm, letting her process the moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her discomfort tangible. It was a strange feeling, watching someone confront their own prejudice so openly. I felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and quiet satisfaction. Relief that the truth was finally seen, sorrow for the unnecessary humiliation I had endured, and satisfaction that perhaps this moment would plant a seed of awareness. She stammered, her voice shaky, trying to make sense of it all. I could see her wrestling with her own embarrassment, her own misjudgment. And though I didn't gloat or scold, I knew the lesson had landed. The power dynamics had shifted, the invisible walls of judgment had crumbled, and the realization was undeniable. She had been completely wrong. I stepped back, took a breath, and watched as the truth settled over the room like a wave. I didn't need to say more. The moment itself said everything. And as I turned to leave the lobby, I realized that this wasn't just a story about a single hotel, a single receptionist, or a single guest. It was a story about the assumptions we make, the silent judgments we carry, and the moments that force us to confront the truth about ourselves and others. As I walked away, I couldn't help but think, how often do we let assumptions guide our actions? How many moments slip by unnoticed, leaving an unspoken mark on someone's life? And perhaps most importantly, how long before we start seeing people for who they really are, instead of what we think they are? Even after the revelation, I couldn't leave the lobby immediately. There was a strange energy in the air, thick and heavy, as if everyone around us had suddenly become aware of the truth, but didn't know how to react. I could see her staring at me, her eyes wide, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to regain composure. The confident, dismissive demeanor she had carried all morning was gone. She looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle that had no clear answer, and I could feel a quiet sense of power building inside me. But it wasn't about power, not really. It was about what had been happening before this moment. The subtle humiliation, the assumptions, the judgment. As I glanced around, I could see colleagues shifting in their spots, whispering quietly to one another, clearly uncomfortable. The realization was settling in for them too. The person she had treated like a nobody, the guest she had dismissed and underestimated, was far more than they ever imagined. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from anger, but from the intensity of the moment. The humiliation I had felt earlier hadn't completely disappeared. It lingered like a shadow, sharp and persistent. I remembered the way her eyes had scanned me with thinly veiled contempt. The sighs, the rolling of her eyes, the sharp tone in her words. And now, I watched her struggle to reconcile the version of me she had judged with the reality she was facing. She attempted to apologize, but her words faltered under the weight of disbelief. I could see her trying to find the right thing to say, but nothing came. And in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me. It was about every moment where someone is judged unfairly, dismissed because of assumptions, or treated with subtle cruelty that leaves a mark far deeper than words could describe. The lobby had become a stage, each of us playing a role we didn't fully understand. Other guests were quietly observing, a few looking curious, some shocked. Staff members lingered near the edges, glancing at each other as though asking, "Did you see that?" The energy was palpable, a mix of tension, awe, and incredulity. and I could feel my own emotions surge. Anger, relief, and a strange kind of sadness all at once. I took a deep breath and allowed myself to speak, softly but firmly. "I know this must be shocking," I said, "but what happened here isn't just about me. It's about how we see others, how quickly we make judgments, and how much we miss when we assume we understand someone without knowing their story." Her gaze dropped to the floor, and I could see the weight of realization settling on her shoulders. Even as I spoke, my mind raced. How often did people miss the real story behind a face? How many times had I seen assumptions shape interactions, create discomfort, or even harm someone in ways they couldn't understand? This morning had been a microcosm of so much more, a small, intense reflection of a reality many prefer to ignore. And now, in this lobby, I had a rare chance to let that reality be seen, to let the truth make its impact. She finally lifted her eyes and looked at me fully, the fear and confusion replaced by something like understanding, though I knew it would take longer for the lesson to fully sink in. I could feel a subtle shift in the room, a quiet acknowledgement that things would never be the same, not here, not in this moment. The ripple effect of a single assumption, of a single dismissive glance, had been exposed for everyone to see. And yet, there was more to come. I knew the moment of revelation wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. How she processed this, how others reacted, and how the subtle injustices we allowed to continue unchecked would unfold, that was still uncertain. But for now, I allowed myself a small cue, with sense of satisfaction. Not arrogance, not revenge, but the knowledge that the truth had been seen, and that one small moment could make a difference in the way people perceive themselves and others. As I stepped back, letting the tension hang, I couldn't help but wonder, how many times do we dismiss someone, not realizing who they are or what they carry inside? How often do our assumptions hurt more than we know? And how many lessons like this are lost because the truth doesn't come out until it's too late? The silence after my words felt endless. The receptionist's face had gone pale, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. I could see her chest rise and fall quickly, her breathing uneven, like she was drowning in the weight of her own mistake. People around us were still watching, their eyes darting between her and me, as if they couldn't believe what had just happened. I didn't shout. I didn't demand anything. I just stood there, steady and calm, letting the truth sink in. And in that quiet moment, I realized something. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her excuses, because the truth was enough. The truth had already spoken louder than anything else could. But deep down, I couldn't ignore how heavy it felt. Because this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just one receptionist, one hotel lobby, or one morning. It was bigger, much bigger. This was about the way people look at you and make decisions in a second without ever knowing your story. It was about how many times someone has been denied respect, dignity, or even safety, just because they didn't look the part, or didn't fit the picture someone had in their head. I could feel the sting in my chest, the ache that came not from her actions alone, but from what they represented. For every person like me who gets dismissed, there are thousands of others who don't get the chance to reveal the truth. They don't get to say, "I own this place." They don't get that moment of vindication. They carry the weight silently, unseen, and unheard. As I stood there, I thought about them. The ones who never got the chance to prove themselves. The ones whose stories ended too soon because someone's judgment turned dangerous. The ones whose voices were silenced before they could ever say, "This is who I really am." That thought cut deeper than anything else. Because what happened to me, this awkward humiliation turned revelation, wasn't the worst version of this story. It was the safer one, the softer one. And I couldn't stop thinking, what if it hadn't been? The receptionist finally whispered, I'm so sorry. Her voice shook, barely louder than a breath. But even then, I knew. It wasn't just me she owed that apology to. It was every person she had ever dismissed. Every person she had ever silently judged. Every person who had felt invisible in a world that should have seen them. I looked her in the eyes, and I said, "Let this be the moment you remember. Not because of who I am, but because of what you almost missed seeing in me. And next time, before you decide who someone is in your mind, look closer." The lobby was still. My words seemed to echo, not just in her, but in everyone who had been watching. I could see it in their faces, the discomfort, the reflection, the quiet recognition that they had all been guilty of it too, in one way or another. And then I walked away, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the heavy understanding that my story was just one of millions. One that ended in revelation. One that left me standing. But how many others don't get that ending? How many times does judgment turn into danger, silence, or even tragedy? How many more stories have to be told before the world finally listens? That's the part that keeps me awake at night. That's the question I carry with me long after the lobby lights faded and the whispers died down. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone looks at a stranger, they'll remember my story. Maybe they'll think twice before dismissing, before assuming, before judging. Because respect shouldn't have to be earned by shocking someone with the truth. Respect should be the starting point, always. When I walked out of the lobby, even the floor beneath my feet felt strange, like every tile, every stone was carrying a piece of my secret along with my steps. My breathing was heavy, but deep inside there was also a strange calm. A calm that came from finally letting the truth be seen, from knowing that the moment when every eye was fixed on me would remain etched in their memory forever. Yet along with that calm was a weight that felt like stones tied to the walls of my heart. I kept asking myself, why does it take revealing our deepest identity for people to finally look at us with respect? Why can't there be a moment when we are simply seen as humans, without labels, without appearances, without boxes? When I reached my room, I closed the door and stood in front of the mirror. I looked into my own eyes. They were tired, drained, but somewhere deep inside them, there was a faint light. The light of not hiding. But alongside that light was pain. The kind of pain that grows from being judged for no reason. The kind of pain that hides beneath someone's mocking smile. As I stared at myself, memories rushed back. Moments when life had tested me again and again. Days when my hard work was underestimated. Moments when my accent, my face, my clothes had become the reason someone decided my worth. And today felt like a reminder of all those stories. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was an old friend. His voice had always been a quiet anchor for me. "Are you okay? Your voice sounds different," he asked. I smiled faintly and replied, "I'm fine. I just learned another lesson today." I told him everything, every word, every stare, every silence. When I was done, there was a pause on the other end. Then he said, "Alec, this isn't just your story. It's the story of everyone who goes through these eyes, these judgments, every single day. Some have the chance to fight back like you. Some don't. His words hit me hard. Yes, I was lucky. Lucky that my truth was powerful enough to stand on its own. But what about the millions of others? For them, the insults, the dismissals, the glances become permanent wounds they carry forever. I walked toward the window. Below me, the city was alive. People moving in every direction, each lost in their own rhythm. Someone tomorrow would stand in a lobby like mine. Someone else would be serving in a restaurant or sitting in a classroom, and they too would be measured, judged, by eyes that see but never truly understand. The thought grew heavier. A question kept echoing in my head. When will the day come when we are valued for our humanity and not our bank accounts, our skin, our appearances? When will society take off its tinted glasses and see us for who we are inside? The question burned like fire inside me. And that fire forced me to make a decision. This story couldn't remain locked in my heart. It had to go out into the world. People needed to hear it, feel it, and maybe change. Because sometimes one story can touch a heart, and one touched heart can ripple into saving many lives. I pulled out an old notebook from the corner of the room. The worn pages waited like old friends. With trembling fingers, I picked up my pen and began to write. Every word cut me open, but every word also stitched me back together. I wrote about the silence in that lobby, about the weight of those stairs, about the receptionist's trembling hands. I trapped it all in ink. And when I finished, I felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. But I knew this was only the beginning, the first step. The story couldn't stop with me. Until the world learned to recognize the faces that lived through such wounds every single day, there would be no real change. Night fell. The city lights outside began to glow, blinking like tiny stars caught between buildings. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer that my voice, my story, might find its way to someone's heart. That, for even a single moment, they would pause, reflect, and choose never again to judge someone by their outer shell. Because sometimes, one moment, one reaction, has the power to change a life forever. The next morning, when the sun's light broke through the curtains, it felt different. Softer, gentler. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like hiding beneath the blankets. I didn't feel like keeping my truth locked away. Instead, I felt the quiet courage to stand up and face the world. No matter how heavy its eyes might be, I walked toward the mirror again. The same mirror that last night had reflected a tired, broken version of me. But today, I saw something else. Yes, my eyes were still tired. The shadows beneath them still whispered of sleepless nights. But they also carried a sharper glow. A glow of someone who had faced the storm and was still standing. That realization, it was more powerful than I can explain. Because for so long, I believed strength only meant being fearless. But now I understood. Real strength is carrying your fear and still walking forward. Real strength is shaking inside but refusing to hide. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring out at the city. Cars moved in endless lines, horns blared, people rushed across the sidewalks. Each one of them had a story, a struggle hidden beneath their skin. And it struck me. How many of those stories would never be told? How many voices were silenced before they could even whisper the truth? I thought about the lobby again, about the receptionist's uneasy glance, about the people who turned their eyes away as if I were invisible, or worse, unworthy. That memory still stung, but instead of breaking me, it now lit a fire. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single person who has ever been pushed aside, laughed at, ignored, or judged simply because they looked different, sounded different, or dared to be themselves. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. My story wouldn't end as just another wound. It would be a weapon, a voice, a spark. If people could silence me with their eyes, then I would fight back with my words. I would tell my story so loudly, so vividly, that it could no longer be ignored. I reached for the notebook I had filled the night before. The ink was still fresh, smudged in some places where my tears had fallen. As I flipped through the pages, I realized this wasn't just my diary anymore. It was the beginning of a movement. Because stories, real stories, have the power to shake people awake. They can pierce through walls built by hate, by prejudice, by ignorance. And maybe, just maybe, my story could be one of those. I picked up my phone and opened the Notes app. My fingers trembled as I typed the first line. My name is Alec Rose, and this is what happened to me. For a moment, I hesitated. What if people laughed again? What if they dismissed it, said I was exaggerating, said I was too sensitive? But then another thought silenced those doubts. What if someone out there needed this story? What if someone was on the edge of giving up and my words pulled them back? That possibility was enough. I hit save, and I knew it was only a matter of time before those words would leave my phone and step into the world. The day stretched on, but inside me, something had shifted forever. I no longer felt like the scared girl trapped in a lobby full of stairs. I was Alec Rose, the girl who spoke, the girl who refused to bow her head. That night, as I lay in bed, a question echoed in my mind, louder than ever before. How many more times will this happen before the world finally listens? It wasn't just to question. It was a challenge to every person who has ever looked away when they should have stood up. A challenge to every voice that stayed silent when justice demanded sound. A challenge to myself, to never stop fighting, never stop telling, never stop being. Because this isn't just my story, it's the story of millions. A story that repeats every day, in countless ways, across every corner of the world. And until the world changes, until justice is not the exception but the rule, I will keep speaking. So if you are listening right now, if you can feel the weight of my words in your chest, then I ask you one thing. Don't let this story die with me. Carry it, share it, reflect on it, because maybe the change we are all waiting for begins with you.
Think about it. Could this happen to you? Some stories aren't just heard, they're felt. Behind every truth, there's a hidden fear. This story won't just shake your mind, it'll haunt your soul. Who could imagine the truth would be this terrifying? The story ends, but the questions stay alive.